Welcome back. Now this on the Abraham Accords. Kazakhstan, the first country to join President Trump's Abraham Accords during his second term. President Trump praising the deal, writing on Truth Social, this is a major step forward in building bridges across the world. Today, more nations are lining up to embrace peace and prosperity through my Abraham Accords. Joining me now with reaction is former Trump and George W. Bush State Department senior official Christian Whiton. Christian, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. So now you've got Morocco, Israel, Sudan, Bahrain, UAE, and now Kazakhstan joining the Abraham Accords. Your reaction?
Yeah, it's unusual. Obviously, Kazakhstan is quite far away. It's a little bit far away from the Middle East, and it has already had relations with Israel since it's got independence from the Soviet Union. It formed relations in 1992, but it does demonstrate some momentum, and that's, I think, what President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio wanted with this visit from Kazakhstan, to show that you could expand this relationship. It's not necessarily done to counterbalance China and Russia, but it does deepen the relationship of a country in Russia's neighborhood with the United States. So just a little bit of momentum, I think.
Let me get your take on the most recent conversation on China. The president, of course, met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Asia last week. And we're understanding that he pressed his counterpart to release media mogul Jimmy Lai. The president citing his major health concerns. Jimmy Lai, as you know, is currently awaiting a verdict after his trial ended over the summer. He was with us many times before he got arrested. And, of course, just recently I spoke with Jimmy's son, Sebastian, about his father's trial and condition. Here's what he told us. Watch.
Look, it's a show trial, textbook show trial. He's been in prison, as you mentioned, for the last 4 years, almost 5 years now. And the trial still hasn't finished. This is a trial where there's 3 national security law judges, allegations of witnesses being tortured, no jury. So they'll just pin whatever they want on him. He's been in solitary confinement this whole time. So 14 days of solitary confinement is considered prolonged solitary confinement and can be considered a form of torture. I know they blocked off national lights to his cell. Yeah. He can't go to mass. I mean, obviously, religion is such an important part of what drove him to stand behind these principles, to stand and protect his people in Hong Kong and stay and protect them. And they're not even letting him this little bit of humanity. It's incredibly distressing.
What a shame, Christian. Jimmy Lai, a freedom fighter, was in Hong Kong when the Hong Kong and Chinese police came in and threw the freedom fighters in jail. In fact, we spoke with Jimmy Lai right before he was arrested. He knew it was coming. Watch this. Are you feeling like the Chinese Communist Party is pumping up the national security laws that they are putting in place, where they could arrest anyone who says anything about the CCP and take them back to China?
Yeah, now they can trump up any offenses as crimes, and the intimidation effect is very enormous. So on the street, that's very quiet. It's a silence of supplication. And also in the Legislative Council, because they DQ 4 of the pro-democratic legislators, all the pro-democratic legislators resign en masse. So we will not have a voice or any fight in the Legislative Council or any demonstration in the street. So, I'm afraid Hong Kong, if we have no news, the world will forget us.
Christian, good for President Trump for bringing up Jimmy Lai. Your thoughts?
Exactly, because, well, frankly, people like you and others, Senator Rick Scott, many others on Capitol Hill, and Catholics and Christians and ordinary Americans around the country have put pressure on President Trump, and I think he relates a bit to Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai is a tycoon. He is guilty of having a pro-democracy, pro-American tabloid, a little bit like the New York Post, but in Hong Kong. The Chinese shut it down, threw him in jail. But, Trump is accused of being transactional. He's accused of just caring only about a quick trade deal, and I think this shows that's That's not true. If you look at Trump's first term, he spent a lot of time getting people out of places where they were wrongfully detained. And you see that happening here. You know, everyone, the normal advice from diplomats, from the Treasury Department would have said, don't bring up a human rights case when you're sitting down with the Chinese leader to try and get a trade deal. But actually, as Ronald Reagan proved, doing that is a sign of confidence, and it's a sign you're willing to put some pressure on the communists. And that's what Trump did.
Yeah, great point. So Jimmy Lai was first arrested in August of 2020. Then he was let out. And then on December 3rd, 2020, he was taken back into custody after his bail was revoked related to the fraud charges. And he's been in jail since. That interview was right before they came and arrested him and revoked his bail. All right, got to get to the Supreme Court hearing, on Wednesday of this week, oral arguments on the president's emergency tariff authority earlier this week, with a verdict expected to be handed down in the coming weeks. The president is warning the U.S. will owe hundreds of billions if the court goes against him. He told me that when I spoke with him just 3 weeks ago. Watch. What is your backup plan should the Supreme Court decision go against you on the tariffs and the emergency
Well, I'll have to figure something out. I don't want to even think about it. We're doing so well to think about it. You know, if that happened, we'd have to pay back money. So if anything would happen with that, that would mean they're allowed to use tariffs and we're not. If they took away, this is national security, if they took away tariffs, then they've taken away our national security.
You know, the national security argument is important here, Christian. How do you think this ruling affects America's position on the world stage? And will the Supreme Court see this as a national security threat?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's unclear. The justices in their arguments imply that they do have some skepticism. We assume that the three left-wing judges, as they always do, will vote against Trump regardless of what they think about the law. Trump has justified these under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, IEPA, which is a successor to the Trading with the Enemies Act. There are other provisions that will allow Trump to basically continue what he is doing. There's the Section 232 and 301 tariffs. You have to do a report, but then you can apply the tariffs. And there's also something called the Trade Act of 1930. So it's not as if the trade war and what Trump has done to stand up for American manufacturing goes away. But it will be, I think, a case of the Supreme Court not recognizing the power of the presidency and national security, which is what the Constitution does. It gives him that authority, not Congress.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that we are in a national security emergency if we are relying on China for 90% of the underlying components in our prescription drugs. And if we're relying on Taiwan for 90% of the advanced semiconductor chips that we need for the military. With China on the march, Russia on the march, he needs supply chains in America, and he's used tariffs to get them there. So we'll see how this plays out. We will know soon. Christian, thank you for weighing in on all of that. Great to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Christian Whiton. We'll be right back. Stay with us.